Sanskrit theatre. Am I audible, by the way? Because Team seems to be hanging up.
Yes, sir,
Yes,
you are
sir.
very audible.
Okay, so classical Sanskrit theatre, and as Bharat says, right, that the theatre uh, is kind of something that is constituted by taking several things from the Vedic Samhitas. That's the theory that Bharat gives. Now, this is a kind of religious, spiritual, mythological theory of the origin of drama, but we really don't know how theater emerged in ancient India, right? And there are many theories that drama emerges from rituals and festivals and so on. Drama emerges from religion very often. So there are several theories of emergence of theater in the West. Sanskrit theater is largely in classical Sanskrit language, which is different from the Vedic Sanskrit. Right? Vedic Sanskrit is the ancient Sanskrit, and classical Sanskrit is the kind of language that became prominent after Panini, around 4th century before Christ, right? Before almost 2,500 years ago, a person called Panini has codified Sanskrit language once and for all, right? And he seems to have done it because Sanskrit language, the rules of grammar were very important for interpreting Vedic texts, the Vedic ruchas and Vedic mantras. So, though mantras were remembered, not many people were aware of its meanings, right? So what is the meaning of Vedic texts, especially Samhitas, the 4 Samhitas that we have been talking about, right? Rugved, Atharvaved, Yajurved, and Samved, right? There are 4 important Samhitas. What did the utterances, mantras mean? And in mantra, meaning is never given very great importance, because mantra is a kind of a shabda, and Vedic uvra or Vedic corpus is also called shabda, sound, and the meaning is never very important in Vedic mantras. So, but even then, to understand how a particular ritual, because great body of Vedic literature is centered around the ritual of yagna of various kind, and so how to do it properly, what are at what time should it be done, and so on and so forth, required interpretation of Vedic texts. So as we have mentioned, that they developed various knowledge systems, Vedanga, like Vyakarana, that is grammatical analysis of Sanskrit, Vedic Sanskrit, Nirukta, which tries to explain the meaning of the word based on its history, something closer to etymology. And one of the most famous Nirukta is Yaska, again before Christ, right? Several centuries before Christ. And in Vyakarana, Panini becomes one of the leading authoritative texts, though not the only text. And Panini's grammar becomes an overriding authority on Sanskrit grammar of the time. And the rules that Panini formulated, right, became fixed. You cannot change it. And once you codify language to an extent that it's not possible to change it historically. Before Panini, Sanskrit language was changing. right? So you have ancient pre-Vedic version of the language called Indo-European language, right? Which is the kind of common language from which even Greek, Latin languages have emerged. And this was the language of people in Central Asia who called each other Aryans. And this is also the proto-language or early language of Iranians, especially the followers of Zoroastrianism, the language of Avesta. I don't know if you've heard of Parsis. Are you aware of Parsi communities in India? Are there Parsis in the class?
Yes.
Right. So word Parsi, pardon? Yeah. Is there any Parsi in the class? Or do you know? Are you aware of Parsis? So the Parsis were actually word comes from Farsi, Iranians, right? Ancient Iranians, and the language and their key scripture is Avesta, Zend Avesta, and the language is called Avestan language. And that also has great deal of similarity with the ancient Proto-Indo-European language of Central Asia, of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Today's Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So these nomadic people brought this ancient language into the Indian subcontinent, and they also composed the ancient Vedic texts and so on, something that we have been discussing. Panini codifies it. Till then it has been changing, right? You can see the change in the Vedic corpus. So Rig Ved is the earliest Vedic Sanskrit, and by the time you reach Brahmanas and Aranyakas, these are other genres of Vedic corpus, right? And Upanishads, you find a change. So it becomes a kind of transitional language between the classical Sanskrit of Panini and the Indo-European language. It has changed over a period of time. And Sanskrit after that becomes completely codified once and for all. So you find that after Mauryans and establishment of Mauryan dynasty, something that is very important because that is also the theme of the play that we are going to discuss by Vishal, right? The Mauryan dynasty came about by replacing the Nanda dynasty, right? And after the decline of Harappan civilization in 1300 BC or so, the dates are not very fixed, but or so, you find the Vedic period emerging. And when the Vedic period is on decline, you find significant changes happening in Indian society. So what are those major changes? So those changes are that the first Harappan civilization was deeply urban. It had two mega cities, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Right? This is urban civilization with drainage and granaries and elaborate crafts and arts and whatnot, and script for writing, right? It's a sedentary civilization. So once it declines due to several environmental issues, you find that central nomadic communities start moving in over a period of hundreds of years into an Indian subcontinent. And early Britishers thought that this was Aryan invasion, but there is no such thing like Aryan invasion. There is no evidence of Aryan invasion. These people migrated into South Asia from Central Asia. And they did not have urban civilization. They did not have script, right? And their major texts were memorized and oral, like the Vedic texts. What happens is after the Vedic period slowly starts declining, you have emergence of second wave of urbanization, second wave of city formations in South Asia or you can say, in Indian subcontinent, and various communities, early polities like called the Mahajanapadas starts emerging, and slowly over a period of time, Magad becomes one of the biggest and the most powerful Mahajanapada, right? Uh, and that is the cradle of new religious movements that seems to emerge, and those waves of religious and philosophical thought can be represented by Buddhist, Jains, and Buddhism, Jainism, and Ajivikas and Charvaks, something that we discussed. And the Magad Empire becomes more and more powerful under Bimbisar of a Hayagriva dynasty, and his son, probably called Ajat who kills his father and becomes the king. So the idea that the practice of killing your father to become king is found in Islamic regimes is a myth, right? So Ajat becomes extremely powerful ruler of Magad. He conquers a lot of territory of northern uh, uh, India, and the center of civilization has shifted from Mohenjo-daro and the north. Okay, how is it? So okay, I will just say. Let me see. Why are they waiting outside? I can't see them. There is only one person called Bernard Shaw struggling to get in. Who are they who are waiting outside? It's not reflected in my team's. Jai. Okay. Let me see if I will post the link in the group. Doesn't matter. I think that's probably what will help. They are likely to be in wrong team, in wrong meeting. Maitreyi and Pooja. Okay, I admitted them. Jai is nowhere to be seen. Anyway, as they join us, they will be admitted. Don't worry. Because once somebody is waiting, it gives me a signal. Great 98 Pooja is also entering now. Okay. So from great Pooja to great Ajat back to who became one of the earliest imperial Magad dynasty. So they defeated all other Mahajanapadas, right? And this second wave of urbanization is the beginning of the dynastic politic in Indian subcontinent. And we find that after Ajat you find Nandas become the prominent dynasty, extremely powerful dynasty of northern India. They are defeated by Chandragupta, right? And it is believed that they were defeated by the cunningness of Chandragupta's mentor called Kautilya or Chanakya. Very little real historical information exists about Chanakya, and a lot of legends and myths have surrounded this very enigmatic figure who is the protagonist of our play, Mudra Rakshas. He is believed to be, and there is no evidence for that, author of Arthashastra, a very important treatise on worldly success and worldly progression. Artha does not mean economics. It's not economics. It's more like material success, success of everyday world, primarily political success in terms of expanding your kingdom. So that is the meaning of the word Artha. And we were discussing the Shastra tradition, and Artha Shastra is the major text attributed to Chanakya. I use the word attributed because there is hardly any historical concrete data about Chanakya. But Mauryans established the empire, and under Ashok, the empire is at its pinnacle. It from Central Asia, right from today's Pakistan and Afghanistan to Java and whatnot, from Burma, and he also had links with Sri Lanka. And the story goes that he wanted to conquer Kalinga, that is Odisha, and somehow that was left unconquered. So Ashok had a very bloody battle at Kalinga, where he destroyed many of the armies of Kalinga in Orissa, today's Orissa. And he was so overcome by bloodshed that he converted to Buddhism. That's the legend. Now, the problem is that these are all legends. We have hardly any concrete historical data. It says that Ashok Maurya Gupta or Ashok Maurya converted to Buddhism, right? But that tells us very important thing, that Buddhism was the religion of conversion, right? Like Jainism. And all the main panthas were patronized by Ashok. And so Ashok invents an idea called Dharma. And it means that whatever is good in all the panthas, right, whether it is Vedic Brahmanism, whether it is Buddhism or Jainism or Ajivikas or Charvak, he finds a common ethical core called Dhamma. And to respect all these panthas, he formulates a policy which has become one of the core ideals of modern secular Indian state. That's why if you see, in a way it is apocryphal. And this notion of equality of all dharmas becomes the model of Indian secularism, right? And that's why you find Ashok Stambha as and Ashok Chakra as major icons of modern Indian state, right? So Ashok Stambha is that pillar with lions, right, around it, and that center is that circle with 24 spokes, which is also found in Indian flag, right? So Ashok's Dhamma Chakra is protecting, patronizing, treating all sampradayas equally. That was the policy. And it is not to be confused with the modern idea of secularism that developed in the West, which says that this life is more important than the life after. That's Western bourgeois or Western middle class ideology that developed in the West. So Ashok becomes one of the leading dynasty for a period of time. And by the time we come to common era, that is zero year of Christ, right? We find that Mauryan dynasty has declined, and it has given rise to many dynasties like the Satvahans, like the Pallav, like the Chol in the south, and you also have Rashtrakutas, Chalukyas, and many other dynasties, Satvahans in Deccan, by the time you reach age of Christ. And this period is the beginning of Kavya in Sanskrit. You find, apart from Mahakavya, Kavyas emerging, something that we discussed yesterday. And by the time you reach Gupta dynasty, another major imperial dynasty after Mauryans is Gupta dynasty, right? Is believed to be the so-called golden age of India. And this is the period of classical Sanskrit drama. And it is this period in which you have Shastra literature exploding in the form of Manusmriti and Yagnavalkya Smriti and all that. You also have an explosion of theater and drama, right? And so the drama that is considered as the golden period of Sanskrit drama is in this period of Guptas in North India. And the leading dramatist is a person called Kalidas, about whom you may have heard. Have you heard of Kalidas?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Where did you hear about Kalidas? Considered as
So he's the author of Shakuntala.
Shakuntala, Abhigyana Shakuntala, right? Shakuntala is the name of the heroine. उसके ऊपर का नाटक है शाकुंतल, अभिज्ञान शाकुंतल, मीन्स रिकॉग्निशन ऑफ शकुंतला. हो जाता है ना, राजा लोग भूल जाते हैं कौन से लड़की के साथ उसके रिश्ते थे, फिर तुम्हें अच्छा याद दिलाना पड़ता है. तो
yes, sir, I know it's a story.
Right.
It's
so
yeah,
but these are considered to be the greatest plays in Sanskrit. Later playwright is Bhas and Bhavabhuti, Shudrak and Vishakdatt, whom we are studying. So these are the major playwrights, right? Bhavabhuti, Shudrak, Kalidas, Bhas, even King Harsha was also one of the important playwrights. And there is also a play on him. So coming to Sanskrit theatre, which was largely developing under the Gupta patronage, right, was largely in the courts of the king. So theatre happens in the courts of the kings or in temple courtyards. So these were the spaces where plays, Sanskrit plays, were performed, right? And the audience was largely highly educated, highly literate, upper caste audience who were allowed to have Sanskrit learning. By the time you reach Kalidas, Sanskrit is no longer the primary language of people. It is the language of the elites. It's the language of spirituality and religion and ritual. It is comparable to classical Latin, right, which is the language of ecclesiastical knowledge, that is religious theological knowledge, and it is the language of classical literature, right? So classical Sanskrit literature constitutes of Mahakavyas, which belong to the Itihasa Purana tradition, and of course the classical Kavya literature that is emerging under the patronage of kings. Sanskrit drama was always theatre, right? By that I mean that it was always inseparable from performance, because natya, as we say, is coming from the same word nrita, to dance. So to dance and to act was seen as a kind of coextensive activity. Performance is what constitutes Sanskrit drama. It was hardly meant to be read by people or studied by people, like the way we study romantic drama or Elizabethan drama in India, right? Religious festivals was also one of the places where you had plays. And the hall used to be where there were plays were not very big. Not very big in comparison to the great, what should I say, great Greek dramas. Greek drama, in contrast to Sanskrit drama, develops almost 700 years before Sanskrit drama emerges, right? And you have playwrights like Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles. Greek theater was part of great public function in a particular city-state like Athens or Sparta, and it was a contest, right? And there used to be judges who would judge which playwright is better, which play is better, and they would win prizes. So that this kind of competitiveness did not exist in Sanskrit drama. Amphitheater structures that you find is distinctiveness of Greek, ancient Greek theater. So you have a smaller hall. There is no curtain which divides stage and people. It was always open. The curtain was at the back, which divided the stage and actors' changing room, green room, or nepathya as it was called. So there are people in nepathya. Actors go and change in nepathya, and they come on the stage by pushing the curtains open and speaking the lines or whatever. So I want you to imagine what kind of stage was it. There was no need for any realism, in the sense that if you are showing a scene of bank of a river or a garden, you are not supposed to make that stage have props of garden or bank of river. So there were hardly any props of, so that kind of realism was not expected. The audience was supposed to imagine that the actors are on the bank of a river or in a garden. And if somebody is boating, so you have to imagine that they are boating, right? The stage in front of people was divided into several zones, right? And when actor walked from one place to another, it would be something like going from one town to another, or going to kitchen, or going to some other place. So that he walks about was often the description of stage. The language used was not one but many, because by the time classical Sanskrit theatre emerges, Sanskrit has ceased to be language of people, right? So only the elites in the play, like the king, like the courtiers, like the queens, like the heroines, like the noble people, Brahmins, would speak Sanskrit. The common ordinary people would speak a language called Prakrut, or language of people, right? And language of marketplace was called Palli or Pali, Bazar ki bhasha. And that Pali later on becomes classical language of Buddhist literature. So a lot of Buddhist literature is found in Pali language. Prakrut also becomes a literary language. A lot of important Prakrut literary texts exist. Most famous is Hal's Satsai. Hal was a great Satvahan king, Satvahan dynasty, which we talked about, of Deccan. And he wrote Satsai, which is anthology of songs in Prakrut, sung by ordinary people in the field, very often erotic love songs. So Prakrit also becomes an important literary language, and equal, and it almost becomes as rigid as Sanskrit, right? So a play used to have multiple languages. Kings and the elites, upper castes, were largely speaking Sanskrit. Ordinary people like you and me would speak Prakrut, and people of even more inferior status would speak Apabransh or Pali or whatever. So it's kind of bilingual, trilingual text. So what is the place of Sanskrit is a complex question. Was Sanskrit an independent language, or was it just a register of religious and pure discourse? Marker of purity, refined. Word Sanskrit means refined. What refined language? So you will find refined Gujarati today, right? People, scholars of Gujarati language would speak Gujarati in a certain way. I don't know if you have heard that kind of refined registers. Anyway, so it is a multilingual text, right? Unlike Shakespeare or Greek theatre, you have a multilingual theatrical practice in India. Prakruts would later develop. Prakruts had a regional variations, right? There was Maharashtri Prakrut, there was Prakrut of northern India. There would be various kinds of Prakruts. Prakrut यानी natural, आम लोगों की आम भाषा. And the fallen corrupt language was called Upbranch, right? So Sanskrit, Prakrut, Upbranch, and Upbranch becomes the language of important religion and philosophical discourse of the Jainas. Buddhists used Pali, right? And later on, everybody used Sanskrit. So coming back to Sanskrit theatre, you can see this kind of multilingual text. And from Upbranch emerges modern Indian languages like Gujarati, Bengali, Tamil, Punjabi. Not Tamil, I am really sorry. Gujarati, Bengali, Punjabi, so-called Hindi, and Marathi, and Gujarati, and so on. And the modern Indo-European language. Tamil language, interestingly, has history as ancient as Sanskrit, and it is probably the most ancient language used in India. However, the classical Sanskrit or classical Tamil, somewhere in the first 5 centuries after Christ, had an elaborate literary theories, literary and grammatical texts like Tolkappiyam, then Tirukkural or Kural, and Changam literature or Sangam literature, which involved a lot of epics like Shilpatikaram and many other epics, and lot of poetry. Right, so Tamil language is lot of has lot of rich and interesting literature, ancient Tamil, and that is my problem with calling Sanskrit as representative of Indian languages, right? Because why not Tamil? Why not Tamil? When you say Sanskrit literature is Indian literature, what about Tamil? Right, so huge amount of Tamil literature and poetics was composed, and the book that I have sent around in the group has an essay on Tamil poetics by A.K. Ramanujan, which is very different from Sanskrit poetics, right? Okay. Some of important aspects of classical Sanskrit plays involved a kind of speaking to oneself very loudly. It is like aloud or Salilaki in Elizabethan drama. Are you aware of Salilaki? What is Salilaki? किसी को पता है?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, बोलो क्या है Salilaki? Why is only one person speaking? दूसरों को पता ही नहीं है क्या?
Sir, I'm happy if anybody else would want to describe it as
Yeah. I wonder if they have attended SYBA and studied history of English literature. Shakespeare में सलीलकी आती है कि नहीं? Who knows? Apart from Bhavya, who? Who else knows about soliloquy? अब तो मैं इंडियन के बारे में नहीं पूछ रहा हूँ, इंडियन लोगों को, मैं शेक्सपियर के बारे में पूछ रहा हूँ, तो उतना तो आना चाहिए कि नहीं? I have heard of soliloquy, but you don't know what it means. Okay, anyone else has heard of soliloquy? Apart from Maitreyi, Harshita, she doesn't remember. Okay, anyone else? Divya, I'm sorry, and Divyang. Have you heard of soliloquy?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
But
sir.
I don't remember. I don't remember the meaning.
Divya, do you remember the meaning?
Yes, sir. I mean, I might not be
Yeah.
precise, but
Yeah, go.
uh,
Whatever you know, it's यहाँ पे आप गलत होगे तो कोई गोली मार नहीं देगा और कोई हंसेगा नहीं क्योंकि किसी को पता नहीं है. Don't worry.
sir, it's kind of like a dramatic monologue where the person kind of gives the audience access to their own inner world and their thoughts and feelings.
Right. Soliloquy is when you're not talking to the character. One character is not talking to another character. He or she is expressing what is going on in the mind to the audience. Right. And we have to believe that the other character does not hear what that actor is saying. उसे soliloquy कहते हैं. Right. And Shakespeare's plays are full of famous soliloquies. Now, in Sanskrit theatre, it was too much of talking about talking with oneself, uh, much more than aside or soliloquy in Western theatre. अपने आप ज़्यादा बातें करते थे. Lot of it, right? That is important part of all this. Lot of things were suggested through acting. For example, there is a bee. Then you have to indicate that bee by acting. Right? So these are some of the aspects of Sanskrit theatre. Probably one of the most important aspects of Sanskrit theatre is use of verse and prose in combination. There used to be shloka and verses in prose passages, combination of verse and prose, right? And combination of lot of music on stage. Music and Bharat's Natya Shastra says that play without music is like painting without color, is like building without color. घर को आप कलर ना करो तो घर कैसा होगा? वैसे ही नाटक में म्यूजिक ना हो तो ऐसे दिखेगा. So music was played by musicians who stood at the back of the theater very often, and there were many songs that were sung. So songs are integral part of Sanskrit drama. Poetic words are important forms of parts of Sanskrit drama, and there used to be also something called mood poems, right, which indicated particular, and it was called dhruva. So when characters entered or exited, or there would be kind of dhruva music heard, and there would be songs, say for example like a song of description of nature which is symbolic. And to give an example, a song really sorry, I have a bad cold. Song about a mighty elephant roaming in forest would stand for a hero who was desperately looking for his lover, right? And the word unmat or mat is when elephants are on heat, means they are looking for mating. So that was used. So hero was compared with elephants on heat. Anything that you have to say about all these things? किसी को कुछ कहना है? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, I read that introduction. Am I audible firstly? I'd like to know that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
sir. Sir, I kind of read that introduction and I see that you're also reading from it, and I'm not aware if we've reached that part. But I had a small suggestion to make / question to ask that this particular author, Michael Colson, stresses how one cannot compare Western literature in any sense, especially drama, with the Sanskrit one, and how different they are, and even the basic structure of it. Now, we are Indians and we actually know Sanskrit a little bit, and you must be very well versed with it. So I was
I'm
hoping
not
if
at
we
all.
could.
I have read a lot of Sanskrit in Hindi and English translation. I'm not well versed in Sanskrit. Though I studied Sanskrit in college, I cannot confess that I can speak in Sanskrit, or I require a kind of glossary to understand. So, though I can make out some, I have smatterings of it, you can say.
Yes,
Yeah.
and since it's kind of our heritage as well, we tend to look at Latin counterparts and Latin references in the sense that we go to their definitions. So I was thinking in this play, when we take it up, perhaps we could go ahead and refer to the original text, and then you could possibly explain it how it is. Certain verses of it, because Sanskrit is a very syntactical language and scientific in its sense, as I read in the introduction. And there was this example this person had given, wherein he gives his translation and then he gives the literal translation of it. And he's like, it seems like a parody of sorts, but that is the thing. For us, it would not be, because kind of the elephant reference also makes sense. And, given the cultural heritage, we do have some understanding of the history. So, this is why I was hoping you could uh, take this into consideration.
Okay,
Apart from that,
how many of you agree with Bhavya? बताओ, हाथ ऊपर करो. What he is saying that we are aware of all this, हमको बताने की जरूरत नहीं, डायरेक्ट प्ले पे जाओ. ये यूरोपियन ऑडियंस के लिए रखा हुआ है इसने. हमको तो काफी कुछ पता ही है. आज जो मैंने कहा, कितने लोगों को पता था? How many of you know about all these things that I have been talking about? Raise your hands.
Sir, I didn't know, but I read the introduction.
So how many of you did read the introduction? So Bhavya and Divyang knows because they have read the introduction. Okay. Who else has read the introduction? Some of them. Okay. Rushin has read. Very good. Maitreyi has. Okay. Harshita says some of them. Okay. ये एलिफेंट वाला कितने लोगों को पता था? Kisa has read. Divyang has read. So Maitreyi, Bhargavi, Divyang, Rushin, Bhavya. और बाकी के लोगों को क्या है? आइडियली आपको पढ़ना है और मुझे एक्सप्लेन करना होता है, बट आप देख रहे हो देयर आर ओनली 6 to 7 people who have read it in the class of 39. Okay, but what I can say, my response to Bhavya is, we really don't know about these traditions. ये हमारा heritage है, मगर it's not part of our lived life. Heritage is in museum. Yes, no, Bhavya? You don't live in Nyay Mandir, do you?
Yes, sir.
आप न्याय मंदिर
Sir,
में रहते हो क्या? आप
no,
लक्ष्मी
sir,
विलास
but no, not
heritage
really.
से भी है. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's not
I'm.
really party. It's a kind of museum piece, right?
Yes, sir. I meant it in a very, in another sense as well, and that was the artistic rendition of the text, because
Hmm.
sort of I can gauge a little bit of it, and like given the language that we have a little bit understanding of that particular text
मैं
as
इसको
well.
भी पढ़ा सकता हूँ. ये है संस्कृत में रुद्रा राक्षस.
Yes, sir.
But I assume that heritage is what you see from the bus. You don't own it. What do you say? We swear by Ved and Upanishads, but I don't know how many of us have actually read some of these texts. रामायण महाभारत टीवी सीरीज देखी है हमने ज्यादा से ज्यादा और कहानियां सुनी है. How many of you have read? I have not read रामायण एंड महाभारत. किसी को कहना है इसके पर? हम कहते हैं ये हमारी विरासत है, हम, मगर हमारा है क्या वो? बस में से जो दिखता है वो हमारा होता है क्या? या धर्म, हैव यू रेड समथिंग फ्रॉम द वैदिक टेक्स्ट?
Hello.
या धर्म.
Hello. Am I audible?
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. I have actually recently started reading.
What? Go ahead.
Yeah. So, but only that, and
Yeah,
yeah, as you said.
so what have you read? Just tell me, what have you started reading?
Hello.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I've seen a few lectures on the Upanishads, and apart from that, as you
I have
said,
asked, have you read Upanishads?
no, sir. I haven't read anything.
आपने लक्ष्मी विलास पैलेस यूट्यूब पे देखा है? आप लक्ष्मी विलास पैलेस के अंदर गए हो क्या? ऐसा मैं पूछता हूँ.
Sir, but I think reading is difficult for me, like reading
Why is it?
those texts.
Why is it? If it is yours, right? If we say this is ours, ये हमारा है, ग्लोरियस कल्चर है, मगर हमारा ग्लोरियस कल्चर तो आप बस में से देखते हो और सोचते भी नहीं वो क्या. Culture should be part of our lived lives, right? Not our culture, is it? Can we call it our culture? Yeah, go ahead.
सर व्हेन वी से कि हमने ये सब पहले भी पढ़ा है, बचपन से स्टोरी सुनी है, रामायण हो या व्हाटएवर इट इज, तो हमको उसकी अवेयरनेस है, हमको उसका नॉलेज नहीं है.
राइट. जैसे कि
Which
आप
is why-
चापना से जाते हो बस में से देखते हो, अरे कितना अच्छा बिल्डिंग है, वाह, या पैलेस कितना अच्छा, हम टिकट लेके घूम के आए पैलेस में. बट माय क्वेश्चन इज दैट पैलेस योर्स?
No.
When you say something is ours, what do you even mean? When you say that all this वेद उपनिषद गीता ये सब हमारी है, राइट? ये हमारी है यानी क्या होता है? हमारा क्या होता है? Is it part of our living life? Is the question. Is it really ours? We claim that it is ours. Yeah, Divyang, go ahead.
Sir, I don't know, like maybe no one would agree with this, but I don't think like a large part of this class, or maybe people who are in my age group, we don't consider studying Sanskrit as a necessity or something. And it has like nothing to do with like, I get it
Your
that
parents know Sanskrit. Divyang, your parents or grandparents know Sanskrit?
um, yes, sir. My grand parents, they knew Sanskrit. My grandfather, he had the entire Ramayana and he had entire Ramayana by heart. So like he used to like
Sanskrit
say,
Ramayana
yeah, the Sanskrit
or
one.
Siddhas Ramayana?
No, the Sanskrit one, I guess. So it's like it is there in the heritage.
How many of you had grandparents who had Ramayana by heart? Raise your hand. Or Mahabharata by heart? Or Gita by heart? Raise your hands. Bhavya had, okay. So Divyang and Bhavya, Harshita, okay. Harshita,
Sir,
you had grandparents, yeah, who knew Sanskrit? One more trick question. चलो आप लोगों को थोड़ा और परेशान करता हूँ मैं आपकी आपकी खुशी के पर थोड़ा और पानी डालता हूँ. Knowing something by heart doesn't mean knowing that language. I know people who have Quran by heart but don't know anything about Arabic in which it is written. हनुमान चालीसा कंठस्थ है मगर हनुमान चालीसा का मतलब कुछ पता नहीं है. ऐसा भी होता है. गायत्री मंत्र बोलते हैं मगर मतलब पता नहीं होता. ऐसे लोग देखे आपने?
Yes, there are plenty of people
Yes, sir.
like that. But the essence of the question and like what I had asked lied within the fact that if we are reading Shakespeare, perhaps, and if there is a mention of Janus, then we go back to the Latin roots of it. We get to know about it properly. So
I
similarly,
what you tell
we
me is to work through the text, right? To take text and through text we go about looking for the context. Is that what you are suggesting? Something like that?
so yes, and if there is a certain part like in Mudra Rakshasa, if there is something that is really beautifully written in Sanskrit, so I would like to enjoy that aesthetic in the very language itself, despite the difficulty in understanding it,
We'll
because
do that.
somewhat I did it in eighth class, like it was pretty awful. I did not know Sanskrit, but I am willing to make that attempt. And
Good.
reading about it in the introduction itself was very daunting. I do not know what an inflection means. I really do not know much about linguistics, and it's quite difficult to understand that as well. And I was
Okay.
hoping you could talk about that a little bit
So I
also, if you
wanted to
reach
talk
that
about
part.
that. You know, I wanted to talk about that, but you asked that. मैं उस टॉपिक पे आने से पहले आपने कहा कि चलो बताओ, तो मैं उसी टॉपिक पे जाने वाला था. ट्रांसलेशन के बारे में, पेज 14-15 onwards, right? And why are we discussing this introduction is, you know, what we call as arts, right, requires frames through which you can make sense of it. It is not really ours. Mudra Rakshas is not really our thing. Though we may claim it as ours, though we claim Sanskrit as ours, it's not really ours because it's not really part of our everyday life. We glorify something without knowing what it is. How many of you agree? Right. For example, Yajurveda has Krishna Yajurveda and Shukla Yajurveda, and you will also find a lot of rites and things which would be in Atharvaveda and Yajurveda. You will find things that are not really spiritual. जैसे कि you want a particular woman or you want a particular man, then how to use mantras to seduce that person, or have male children, or have cows, or have a lot of wealth, right? So these are the things that you may find in the Vedic texts even. So very often we glorify things without knowing them. Yeah, Dharma, go ahead.
Yes sir, so आपने ये बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग पॉइंट रेज किया है अबाउट थिंग्स relevant to our everyday lives, and I see that even in the Indian names, like most of the Indian names are somehow related to the Vedas or the Upanishads or the
कैसे
Sanskrit
कैसे पता
language.
कैसे पता चला तेरे को कि सब वो वेद और उपनिषद से जुड़े हुए नाम है?
सर मेरा खुद का नाम इज रिलेटेड टू
भाई
आपने
मेरा नाम बहुत बड़ा है, हम
हाँ
आम लोग की बात कर रहे हैं, जैसे कि
और
हर्ष,
इवन
दो हर्ष है,
यू
हर्षिता
मेंशनड
भी, गौरव भी है, दिव्यांग है, ध्रुविक है, भार्गवी है, भव्या है, राइट? Okay. Anyway, yeah. So the point that you are making is
इज दैट वी माइट वी जिनके नाम है उनको पता नहीं होगा कि उनके कल किस कॉन्टेक्स्ट है, व्हाट डज इट मीन एंड एवरीथिंग, बट दे आर इंडीड कनेक्टेड somehow with the culture that we live in.
though my assumption is that most of you know the meaning of your names. Most of you. I don't doubt that. Is there anyone who doesn't know the meaning of your name? I don't think that's okay. But I'm not talking of that. What I'm saying is that we claim a lot of things to be ours and great and glorious, but we have no idea what it is. And secondly, we don't bother to look up. And third is, it's not really part of our life. So claim kaise, on basis of what do we claim? I may claim that Mars is mine. पर Mars को भी लगना चाहिए. So claim तो आप कुछ भी कर सकते हो. Claim का basis भी कुछ होना चाहिए, right? So the reason I am looking at introduction at length is I am trying to provide historical contextual frames through which to make sense of these texts. You require something called paratext. Have you heard of the term paratext? Paratext is material like introduction, preface, foreword, afterword, glossary, notes, index that a book has. This is called paratextual thing. So we need a lot of paratextual material to understand these texts. Yeah, Divyang, go ahead.
Yeah, so sir, I just wanted to say on. I think Dharm said that so many names in our country are from the Vedas and everything. So like, I don't know how much of that is true, but like my name Divyang, it was supposed to be Arjun's name in some context or something. So I get it, like that maybe the origin of my name is there, but I grew up to be agnostic. I grew up to be queer. I grew up to be an anti-caste person. So then, what is the point of the origin from where my name comes?
Right. नाम भव्या है मगर उसकी हेल्थ अच्छी नहीं रहती. For example, नाम it's a proper names are not selected by us. Only Instagram handles are selected by us, right? So we can't do much about it, but that becomes some way to identify to how will I give you marks if I don't know you are young, right? And I really admire what you're saying about yourself. It requires some courage to say that, right, Divyang? So that's
Thank
really,
you, sir.
yeah. But that's besides the point. My point is not that, right? You may be atheist or whatever, agnostic or whatever. My point is that when we say something is ours, we have to really figure out for ourselves whether something is ours, right? When I look at Lakshmi Vilas Palace, I know it's not mine. So it may be heritage, but is it really mine? That's the question. So, and that is one of the reasons why we actually require a lot of paratextual help to introduce the text. And the problem with our study of literature is that we study literature as if it is cut off from its historical context. And it's straight. We think it is, text does not have any relation with its historical background or context. That's how we are used to study text. And that is not the way that we should be studying any literary or any cultural text. And going back to your semester 1 conversation about you come here not to study literature, but study how to study literature, right? So we are looking at these paratextual frames so as to understand the content and the form of the play that we are going to look at. And I was going to move over to the topic that you have raised. Michael Coulson has not translated this play for Bhavya or Harshita. He has translated it for European audience, English audience, right? But we are Macaulay's children, right? We are Indian in blood and color, but our brains are almost European. But they are not really Europeans, right? We are neither Europeans nor Indians. We are in the limbo. So, given these things, we have to learn how to situate these texts, right? So, giving you this would have actually created a lot of problems for you. In Sanskrit और नीचे उसका translation बहुत पुराना type का है. First, the text is in Sanskrit, followed by English translation. दूसरे इसमें second part of the poem. That's how it is structured. So people who are interested in learning or trying to approach it through Sanskrit should use this book. But we are studying it in translation. And one of the points that we did not extensively discuss while we unpacked the term Indian writing in English translation is the notion of translation itself, right? वाचून तुला कळवू का? आता क्लास घेतो मग मला लगेच दुसरा क्लास आहे. माझ्याकडे तुझ्याकडे कॉपी आहे ना? राईट राईट ओके मी तुला कळवतो. Looks good. Seems to be interesting. Yeah.
This is only chapter 1.
Right. I will go. Yeah. Right. That is important. Where I will get a sense.
Plants details add करायची बाकी. बरं. सरांसोबत डिस्कस करून आणि कोणते प्लांट्स टाकता येतील. म्हणजे अजून थोडंसं लेंदी होईल ते. बरोबर. पण जी ओव्हरऑल स्टोरी आहे
मोठं असलंच पाहिजे. तर मी बघतो आणि कळवतो.
शुअर सर.
राईट.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So the frames that we are going to use is translation, and this is the topic that we have not really explored at length. And point that I was going to end my conversation about the Sanskrit play was the question of music as essential to the bhav of the play, right? And if you look at our cinematic traditions, it has drawn upon Indian theatrical traditions, whether it is folk or classical, right? And that explains why you have such loud background music, so many songs in the films, right? And I think Michael Coulson makes a point on page 14 that just as in modern cinema, he compares it with modern cinema. Background music can obviously ruin the artistic impact of the film. But in India, just listen to the way we put background music. So I wanted to emphasize this point before I went over to the question that Bhavya is indirectly asking me, right? Of the question of translation. So this actually ties up with the point that I had made in the beginning, that whenever we express our dislike and likes in cinema, we have to move beyond them, right? A student of cinema is not the same person as person who enjoys or not enjoys a film. This is something that I said in core paper 1. I don't know how many of you remember. How many of you remember? core 1. 5000 साल पहले मैंने कहा था, जब कोरोना से पहले BC, right? So if you look at Hindi cinema as a person of doing film studies, then music and dance sequences and loud background music or melodrama is for me important. Whether I like it or not is insignificant. I hope you get what I'm saying. जैसे बॉटनिस्ट फूल को देखता है तब वो फूल की खुशबू से पसंद ना भी आए तो भी उसे देखना पड़ता है ना? So, and that's why I said you should also be prepared to do boring stuff. How many of you remember this conversation? That you should be willing to read boring stuff is because you are developing an expertise in certain things, right? And how many of you were bored studying things in your SY and semester 2? काफी boring चीजें आई थी. But I don't know when you were bored whether you remembered what I said. Right? Now a person may say, a doctor may say that it's kidneys that fascinate me. I'm not really interested in intestine. He's not a doctor. Right? No.
Yes.
So your preferences and likes don't matter. Right? And we are studying how to study. So we are studying Indian writing in English and in English translation. We discuss English at length, but the question of translation crops up. And in the introduction, Carlson admits that there are no degrees of success in translation. There are only degrees of failure. Right? But the translators of Sanskrit Kavya have more to complain about than most. And the reason he gives is the nature of Sanskrit language. Now, Sanskrit language is highly inflected. And what do you mean by inflected? Inflection is the term used in grammar, right? And I don't know if you studied any regional language in school or Sanskrit. Hindi grammar कितने लोगों ने स्कूल में पढ़ा है? स्कूल में हिंदी, गुजराती, संस्कृत का ग्रामर एक किसी भी एक का,
right? All of them.
हिंदी, गुजराती और
except for Sanskrit.
नहीं, किसी भी इन तीनों में से किसी भी इंडियन लैंग्वेज का ग्रामर.
हाँ सर, सिखाया है काफी बार.
हाँ, और the terms, what do you mean by inflection here is what is known as vibhakti. Have you heard of the term vibhakti?
Yes, sir.
Vibhakti is the suffix that is added to the root word to indicate its function. जैसे one word is noun, तो आपको कैसे पता चलेगा? तो उसका inflection या उसका suffix देख के आपको पता चलता है कि ये word है noun. या this is the subject, this is the object, this is the word. Parts of the speech, right, are indicated, or whether they are singular, plural, or dual. Now, dual is a speciality of Sanskrit. English has singular and plural. Sanskrit has singular, plural, and dual. Dual का मतलब दो लोग, वो दो, right? Ram, Lakshman, ho. So Ram and Lakshman, both of them. तो उसके लिए एक suffix होता है. इंग्लिश में क्या होता है? सिंगुलर होता है या प्लूरल होता है? लाइक मैन एंड मैन, सिंगुलर एंड प्लूरल. बट टू मेन बताना हो तो कोई भी ग्रामेटिकल कैटेगरी है नहीं. So Sanskrit has this dual as one of the important vibhakti. So vibhaktis are these kind of indicators of functions of the word. Now, because of extensive vibhakti and compounding, something called samas, you can have immense flexibility in the word order of Sanskrit. And that is, I don't know whether it's good thing or bad thing. For example, I went home. Home went is grammatically incorrect, right? And that is because English does not have any inflection for home. I hope you are getting what I'm saying. Home को कोई suffix लगता नहीं है, इसलिए I went home. Home went I is not grammatically correct. It's acceptable only in poetry. I hope you get what I'm saying. Because there is no suffix for home. But in Sanskrit, home will have a suffix. So what happens that the object can come anywhere. In English, subject, verb, object, ये fixed है, rigid है. गुजराती, हिंदी, तमिल पता नहीं. गुजराती, हिंदी, बांग्ला, पंजाबी, सब्जेक्ट, ऑब्जेक्ट, वर्ब फिक्स्ड है. मैं घर गया, मैं गया घर, घर में गया are not very convenient, right? So subject, object, verb is fixed in Hindi, Punjabi, Tamil, Bangla, Marathi. In English, subject, verb, object is fixed. I went home. But in Sanskrit, the object can come first, verb can come later, subject can come last. OIB, SOB, VOS, SV, all permutation and combinations are grammatically acceptable because that does not change the meaning of the text. So given this flexibility of word order and immense compounding, classical Sanskrit has a very, very different structure from English as well as from modern Indian languages. So it has its own music, it has its own cadences, it has its own structural patterning, which is very different from English. And to give a sense of that, he has given an example of an English poem by W.H. Auden on page 16. And he says, for the clear voice suddenly singing high up in the convent wall, the scent of elder bushes, the sporting prints in the hall, the croquet matches in summer, the handshake, the cuff, the kiss, there is always a wicked secret, a private reason for this. This is a poem by W.H. Auden. Now this has got rhyme and meter and all that, so it sounds musical. But if you are to translate this into Sanskrit, right? If you want to write this in Sanskrit, it will create this kind of structures. On page 16, convent wall height sudden clear singing voice signaled. Elder bush scent hinted is one samas and one sandhi. Hall hung sporting print is another compound. Lurking. Hall hung sporting prints lurking ये एक ही phrase है, which does not make any sense. Summer held crochet match is implicit, एक ही पद है. Handshake cuff kiss betrayed is also one sandhi से बना हुआ compound. Everyone are found wicked, private reason based secrets. Private reason based secret ये एक ही term, एक ही phrase है. And in English, it's not acceptable, right? Nobody will think this is English. And the kind of compounding is called a bahuvrihi samas. Yeah. Now, these differences in languages, right, play a very important role in translation. And so, poetry, which relies excessively, Kavya relies excessively on grammatical structures of language. You cannot have a similar rendition in other languages. I hope you get it. So there is no equivalence at grammatical structures, making translations impossible in a very narrow sense of the word translation. So what has Michael Coulson done? On page 17, he says that I have tried to render it like this. Everyone finds wicked secrets based on private reasons. They are signaled by the sudden clear singing voice in the height of a convent wall. The scent of elder bushes hint at them, and they lurk among sporting sprints hung in the hall. Crochet matches in summers imply them. Handshakes, cuffs, and kisses betray them. Now, this rendition is prosaic. It captures the meaning closely, but it does not capture the music and cadences and the beauty of Sanskrit text. I hope you get what he's trying to say. He's trying to help the European audience imagine what kind of language Sanskrit is. Okay, Harshita, बोलो क्या कहना है? So these are some of the background ideas that should be kept in mind before. Doesn't matter. Which are to be kept in mind while we study Sanskrit plays. So the intention of the introduction is to make Sanskrit texts accessible to European English reader, right? And it will definitely help us to understand the play. And that is my position. So people who say कि हमें तो बहुत सारा पता है, जैसे शेक्सपियर पढ़ते हैं वैसे पढ़ेंगे, ऐसे नहीं हो सकता है ना, क्योंकि आप ऐसे टेरेन पे जा रहे हो जो आपने पहले कभी भी विजिट नहीं किया है, राइट भव्या?
Yes, sir, and this was the very crux of the question that I had asked. I wanted to know, should I, or in general, should the student reading this, studying this paper, should he or she be more like expected to be same as a European or an English student who only knows of Shakespeare and all that, because we are quite similar to them. Possibly we
मुद्रा
generally.
राक्षस का नाम सुना था सिलेबस में आने से पहले, नाटक का नाम सुना था, रेज योर हैंड जिनका संस्कृत सब्जेक्ट है, उनके बारे में नहीं बोल रहा हूँ मैं, जिनका संस्कृत सब्जेक्ट नहीं था. Okay, Harshita, you had heard of this play? हर्षिता का हाथ ऑटोमेटिकली उठ जाता है गलती से. Okay, so you can see this, right? Nobody is responding to the question. उन्होंने सुना ही नहीं था नाम.
Yes, it was just about what's the expectation of from the student, like how should one be approaching it and how one should be reading it. Should it be read from the perspective of someone who possibly has read a little bit of Sanskrit in his school or something?
ऐसे कहते थे कि राजाराम मोहन रॉय के घर में 2 रूम थे, एक अंदर का रूम जो इंडियंस के लिए था और बाहर का रूम जो उसके यूरोपियन इंग्लिश फ्रेंड्स के लिए था. तो जब वो बाहर के रूम में था तो वो सबसे इंडियन बंदा था, अंग्रेज लोगों के बीच में वो सबसे भारतीय था, मगर वो जब आज अंदर जाता था तो सब भारतीय में वो सबसे ज्यादा यूरोपियन था.
Yes, sir, I can very well relate to that, given that, I also go to my villages at time, and I certainly understand his plight now.
Can you identify how many of you can relate to Rajaram Mohan Roy's position? That among his Western friends, he was the most Indian, and among his Indian friends, he was the most West. So the basic idea that Macaulay had was to create a class of people who are Indians in blood and color, but European in their brains, right? is what creates this predicament for us. And when I say us, I'm not talking about you, because I am in the same boat as you are. Right? And that's why most of my life I have focused on Gujarati and Marathi literatures for research. मेरा PhD से लेकर आज तक मैं गुजराती या मराठी से ही काम चलाता हूँ, लेकिन वही मुझे आज तक कितना सारा है जो मुझे पता नहीं, तो मैं शेक्सपियर जान के क्या करूँगा. However, I like Shakespeare. I love English literature. The English and the American literary canons and European literature are my particular favorites. I also love Latin American literature. But if I don't know what is in my backyard, मार्स पे पानी ढूंढने से क्या मिलेगा मुझको? बैकयार्ड में पानी था या नहीं मुझे पता नहीं मेरे, और मैं मार्स पे पानी ढूंढने जा रहा हूँ. It doesn't make sense, right? So 25 years of my life I've spent trying to find out whether there is some water in my backyard. And I have found some water. I don't need to go to Mars, though I may like water from Mars, right? Okay, so this is where I want to stop for today. Tomorrow, we'll discuss more about translation, but more about Vishakha and his play. Done?
No.
Okay, sir.
Any questions, doubts before we stop? Can I?